New York City was merciless in winter. The snow came down like punishment, and the wind bit like it had a grudge. But for Richard Langston, once known as the tech mogul behind Langston Innovations, none of that mattered anymore. The cold was just another insult in a long list. Just a year ago, Richard's name had been splashed across business magazines, hailed as the modern Midas who turned everything he touched into gold. But his empire had crumbled faster than it rose. Bad investments, betrayals, and a final blow from a scandal that wasn't even his fault. Now he lived in a modest two-bedroom rental downtown, far away from penthouses and stock tickers. He walked past Bryant Park one icy afternoon, his coat too thin, hands in his pockets. He'd been out trying to land a consulting gig, anything, to make rent. His pride was gone, replaced by something heavier, something that whispered in his ear that maybe he wasn't ever going to come back from this. That's when he saw her, curled up on a bench, bundled in layers of worn clothing. A little girl sat holding a cardboard sign that read, "Just need a warm meal." Her cheeks were raw red from the cold, but her eyes were sharp, watching everyone with quiet calculation. He almost walked past. Almost. But something about her stopped him. "Hey," he said, crouching down. "Where's your family?" She looked up, skeptical, her voice guarded. "Dead. Foster homes suck. I'm better off alone." "How old are you?" 12. He glanced at her shivering hands. "You can't stay out here." She narrowed her eyes. "Why do you care?" Richard smiled bitterly. "Maybe because I know what it feels like to lose everything." They stared at each other for a moment, two people thrown out by the world, testing if either had any kindness left. Then, against all logic, against all sense, Richard said, "Come on, I'll get you dinner." "Where?" "My place." She paused, lips pressed tight, calculating again. But hunger was stronger than doubt. "I'm not doing anything creepy," he added quickly, sensing her fear. "You can take the couch, you can leave after you eat." She finally stood up, stiff and slow. "Fine, but if you try anything weird, I know how to stab with a pen." Richard snorted. "Duly noted." They walked in silence most of the way. She kept her distance, eyeing him with suspicion every time he glanced at her. But when he brought out a sandwich and a can of Coke from his tiny fridge, she wolfed them down like she hadn't eaten in days. "So," he said carefully, "you got a name?" She wiped her mouth with her sleeve. "Ellie. Ellie Burns." "You got anyone looking for you?" "Nope." Richard looked at her and felt something twist in his chest. She was a kid, but not. She had that hardened, guarded way about her that came from being hurt too often. He saw himself in her, more than he liked to admit. "You want to crash here?" "For a few nights," she froze. "Why would you let me?" "Because," he said, sighing, "I used to be rich, now I've got nothing. Maybe helping you makes me feel less useless." She looked at him. Really looked. "You're weird." "Thanks." The next few days turned into a week, then 2. Richard started checking in on her every evening after his odd jobs. She never asked for anything, but always helped clean. She didn't talk much, but she listened, observed, quietly smart. One night, Richard came home to find her at his old computer, which barely ran anymore. He nearly yelled until he saw what she was doing. She wasn't just playing around. She was reading coding forums, writing scripts, fixing his broken machine. He blinked. "What are you doing?" She turned, blinking. "I noticed your RAM had a leak. I patched the registry and wrote a cleaner loop." He gawked at her. How do you know how to do that?" She shrugged. "I read a lot. Libraries, shelters, books are free. Computers make sense to me." He sat down slowly, the weight of something enormous pressing into him. "Ellie," he said quietly, "how much do you know about tech?" She tilted her head. "Not everything. But I taught myself Python, C++, and Java. Also, I hacked my last shelter's internet just to download MIT OpenCourseware." Richard just stared. This girl, this homeless, bitter little street kid, was a bloody genius. And suddenly, the world felt a little different. Richard couldn't sleep that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the soft hum of his old desktop filling the silence. Ellie had gone to sleep on the couch after tinkering with the system for hours. Her face finally relaxed for once. He could still see the way her eyes lit up when she explained how she rerouted the boot sequence. That wasn't just talent, that was brilliance. She reminded him of someone himself when he was younger, when the world hadn't beaten the hope out of him yet, but the thought of what that brilliance might become, if nurtured, if protected, it filled him with something he hadn't felt in months. Purpose. The next morning, Richard poured cereal into 2 chipped bowls and placed one in front of Ellie, who had her nose buried in a copy of Data Structures and Algorithms she'd found on his bookshelf. He cleared his throat. "Ellie, I've been thinking." "Uh-oh," she said, grinning slightly. "I want to look into adoption. Foster care, maybe. Something legal. I'm not rich anymore, but I can't send you back to the street." Her spoon froze halfway to her mouth. "You'd adopt me?" "Look, I get it. You've been burned, but I mean it. I got nothing to offer but a roof and food and—" "You're broke," she interrupted, not unkindly. "They're gonna laugh at you. You know that, right?" He smiled, eyes tired but honest. "They've been laughing for a while now." Ellie didn't speak for a moment. Then quietly she said, "Okay, we'll try." That same week, Richard made the calls. Social services weren't exactly thrilled about a bankrupt man taking in a homeless kid, but his record was clean, his story legit. It was hard to ignore the fact that Ellie herself insisted she wanted to stay. After some reluctant evaluations and follow-ups, they allowed temporary custody. Word got out. People whispered. Some mocked. "Isn't that the guy who lost billions?" Now. "He's adopting street kids. What's he trying to prove?" Richard ignored them. Ellie didn't. She heard the murmurs, saw the sneers. But instead of breaking her, it sharpened her. She started staying up late, reading books Richard brought home from thrift stores, downloading courses when the Wi-Fi decided to cooperate. She scribbled notes on napkins, Post-its, cereal boxes. She asked Richard about his past work, his startups, the rise and crash. She wanted to know everything. And she wasn't just learning, she was building. One night, Richard came home to find Ellie sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by wires and circuit boards. "What is this?" he asked. "I'm building a diagnostic algorithm." "For old hardware," she said, not looking up. "You said people throw away tech that still has life in it. If we could auto-scan and repair, maybe we could sell refurbished machines." He blinked. "That's actually a great idea," she smiled. "I know." They spent the next month working together. Ellie built, Richard pitched. They cleaned, recoded, rebuilt donated laptops and PCs. Ellie's diagnostic tool, what she jokingly called Frankenfix, got faster with every update. They posted online. A few orders trickled in. Then came the flood. Someone posted their refurbished laptops on Reddit. "Fixed by a 12-year-old tech prodigy living with a broke ex-millionaire," the headline read. It went viral. Journalists came knocking. First local, then national. They asked Richard if it was a publicity stunt. They asked Ellie how she learned so much on the streets. They asked if the rumors were true, that a homeless genius and a bankrupt tycoon were rebuilding their lives together. Ellie answered most questions with a shrug. Richard just said, "I got lucky. She let me help her." A startup reached out. Then, too, investors started sniffing around, offering small grants, sponsorships, mentorships. They didn't need much, just enough to keep growing. The media dubbed her the girl who rewired rock bottom, but Richard didn't care about any of that. What mattered was the way Ellie smiled now, the way she walked into rooms without flinching, the way she believed in herself again. Then one morning, Richard got a letter from the Department of Education. Ellie had been nominated for a full-ride scholarship to MIT. He stood there in the kitchen, letter trembling in his hands, as Ellie walked in and saw his expression. "What's wrong?" He handed her the letter. She read it in silence, then looked up, voice almost breaking. "You did this." "No," he said softly, eyes glassy. "You did." The weeks after the MIT letter were a blur. Reporters wouldn't stop calling. Invitations to conferences, mentorship programs, and TED-style talks started pouring in. Everyone suddenly wanted a piece of the street kid savant who got discovered by a failed tech tycoon. Richard tried to shield Ellie from the noise, but she wasn't fazed. If anything, she was focused like never before. She didn't brag. She didn't gloat. She just worked. Quietly. Obsessively. She improved Frankenfix, started mapping out plans for new diagnostic features, and even designed an app that could crowdsource parts from broken electronics. Richard watched her, in awe, day after day. The kind of mind she had, it wasn't just rare. It was once in a generation, but there was a shadow beneath all the praise. Not everyone was happy about her rise. Some called her a fake, accused Richard of exploiting her genius for profit. Online trolls dug into his bankruptcy records, twisted. Facts suggested she was some sort of project he used to rebuild his brand. The hate mail started small, then grew darker. "You're just using her, she's too young to know better." Scammer teaching a runaway to do his dirty work. "Child prodigies don't come from alleys. Nice PR move, loser." Richard read every message and deleted them silently. He didn't show Ellie. She already carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. She didn't need that on top of it. But of course, she found out anyway. She walked into his room one night, phone in hand, pale and stiff. "Why didn't you—" "Tell me." He looked up from his desk, startled. "Tell you what?" She turned the phone screen toward him. Comments, dozens of them. Cruel, vicious, bitter. He stood up. "Ellie, those people don't matter. They don't know you. They don't—" "Maybe they're right," she said, voice cracking. "Maybe you shouldn't have found me. Maybe I'm just a headline." He walked over, kneeling in front of her. "No, no, Ellie, listen to me. They're wrong. You're not a prop. You're the most brilliant person I've ever met, and I've worked with engineers from all over the world. You saved yourself long. Before I came along." She stared at him, breathing shaky. "I don't care what they say. I'd do it all over again. I don't care if the whole world laughs at me. I'd take you in again every damn time." She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she hugged him. It was the first time she ever had. After that, they turned off the noise. No more interviews, no more features. Ellie declined all talk show invitations. Instead, she focused on one thing, building something of her own. She called it Second Core, a non-profit tech collective that taught underprivileged kids how to code, repair, and build computers from scratch. Richard helped her register it legally. A few of his old connections came back around, quietly this time, offering support. Grants, equipment donations. Within 3 months, they had a small office and a classroom. Ellie taught the first few sessions herself. Kids came in scared and shy, just like she once was. She told them the truth. No fancy slogans, no fluff. "I used to live in a cardboard box near Bryant Park," she told one group. "Now I'm going to MIT, and if you think you're not smart enough, you're wrong." She wasn't a kid genius anymore. She was a leader. That winter, on the 1-year anniversary of the day Richard found her, they went back to the bench in Bryant Park. It was snowing again. Bitter cold, just like that day. Richard pulled a thermos from his coat and handed her a cup of hot chocolate. "You still think I'm crazy for taking you in?" he asked. Ellie sipped the drink and smirked. "Absolutely, but I'm glad you did." They sat in silence for a while, watching the snowfall. Two people the world had given up on, one bankrupt millionaire, one homeless genius, and somehow they'd saved each other. Spring brought a shift. The air wasn't as sharp, and the days grew longer. Richard could feel something changing, not just in the weather, but in Ellie. She seemed taller, older, more confident. She still wore the same beat-up hoodie half the time, but she walked differently, like someone who knew who she was becoming. But growth came with its own challenges. Second Core was expanding faster than they expected. Word had spread about Ellie's workshops, free classes for kids with nowhere else to turn. Former Street. Kids, foster youth, high school dropouts, they were all showing up. At first there were 10, then 20, and soon Richard had to start turning people away because they simply didn't have space. They needed funding, real funding. Richard started making calls, reaching out to venture capitalists, old friends, ex-competitors. Most were hesitant. Some were polite. Others laughed outright. "Langston, the guy who burned through 4 startups and $1 billion, now you're running a tech shelter?" One call in particular stuck with him. It was from Peter Vale, an old partner who once tried to poach Richard's best engineers before his downfall. Peter chuckled on the line. "Richie, you've got guts. I'll give you that. adopting a little tech prodigy to fix your reputation. It's good PR, but let's not pretend this is a real company. It's not about PR, Richard said quietly. It's about giving people like her a chance. Sure it is, Peter said. Listen, if she's really the genius they say, send her my way when she turns 18. Maybe I'll hire her after MIT. Richard hung up without saying another word. He didn't tell Ellie about the call, but that night he stayed up late going through their books, trying to stretch every dollar. He wasn't going to let her dream fall apart, because the world still saw him as a failure. Then came the email. Subject: We're interested in Second Core, from Dr. Mariana El-Khoury, Tech for Change Foundation. The foundation was a global non-profit that funded innovative education programs. They'd read about Ellie in an old blog post and looked into the project quietly. The email said they were impressed. Very impressed. Ellie nearly fell out of her chair when they read the full proposal. A 6-month grant, enough to rent a bigger space, hire part-time instructors, even provide laptops for every student. The only catch? A panel presentation. In person, Ellie would need to stand in front of their board and pitch it herself. No problem, she said. At first, but Richard could see her fingers twitching, her leg bouncing under the table. You okay? He asked. I don't like people looking at me. Judging me, she said, her voice quiet. I keep thinking, what if they see me and don't believe I'm smart enough? He knelt beside her chair. Ellie, the world already didn't believe in you, and look where you are now. I'm still that kid on the bench sometimes, Rich. I feel her. In the back of my head, he nodded slowly. Then let her watch you walk into that room and blow their minds. The day of the presentation, Ellie wore a blazer someone donated to Second Core. It was too big at the shoulders, but she didn't care. Richard stood at the back of the conference room, pretending he wasn't nervous, but his hands were shaking. Ellie walked to the podium. She stood silently for a few seconds, then she began. She told them her story, but not the one the media told. She spoke about the shelter, the broken systems, the way most people ignored her. Then she told them about Richard, about Second Core, about the kids who didn't know what Python or Java was, but learned anyway because someone finally gave them a chance. She didn't cry. She didn't fumble. She owned the room. At the end, the room erupted in applause. Even the board members. Stood afterward, Dr. El-Khoury came to speak to Richard directly. You were right to believe in her, she said softly. We'll be transferring the first round of funding this week. Ellie came running toward him in the hallway, arms flung. Around his neck, I did it, she whispered, breathless. I really did it. He laughed, tears in his eyes. I never doubted you. And in that moment, as the weight of rejection and failure lifted off his shoulders for the first time in years, Richard realized something. He wasn't a bankrupt millionaire anymore. He was the father of a revolution. By summer, Second Core had become more than a project. It was a movement. The new facility was in an old warehouse near the edge of Brooklyn, donated by a local councilwoman who believed in what Ellie was doing. The walls were still rough and the paint peeled in places, but it was theirs. Every desk, every salvaged computer, every student who walked in the door, it all meant something. And Ellie? She was everywhere. Mornings spent teaching algorithms. Afternoons fixing broken machines. Nights coding new updates to Frankenfix, which had now been downloaded over 10,000 times across community centers and non-profits. MIT had even invited her to do a guest lecture before she'd even stepped foot on campus. She tried to stay humble. She tried not to let the cameras and requests and compliments get to her, but sometimes it overwhelmed her. That's when she would sneak up to the rooftop of Second Core, just to breathe, just to be Ellie again. Richard always knew where to find her. One night he joined her up there. They sat on the ledge, legs dangling over the city. You remember this time last year? She said, arms around her knees. He smiled. You mean when you threatened to stab me with a pen? She chuckled. I still would. If you ever became an arrogant jerk again, I'll keep that in mind. They watched the skyline in silence, distant sirens, honks, the hum of life below. Then she said, I think I'm scared to leave. MIT, she nodded. It's everything I ever wanted. But this place, the kids, what if I lose it all again? Richard looked at her, really looked. You're not the same girl I met on that bench. You're not surviving anymore, Ellie. You're leading. You don't lose people by growing. You carry them forward. She bit her lip. And what about you? He sighed. I'll keep the lights on, keep things running. You built the engine. I'll keep it humming till you get back. She leaned her head on his shoulder. You're not so bad for a bankrupt millionaire. He grinned. You know I hate that nickname. I love it, she said. It reminds me that people can change. In the months that followed, the world kept knocking. Second Corps was invited to partner with international programs. Ellie's story became a case study in universities about education inequality and talent discovery. Schools asked for her curriculum. Non-profits asked for her tech. Investors offered millions. But she turned most of them down. She didn't want this to become another brand. Another startup with a mission statement and a hollow heart. She wanted it to stay real. And when the day came to move into her dorm at MIT, Richard drove her himself. The car was filled with awkward silence for most of the ride. Neither of them wanted to admit how hard this part was. When they pulled up to the campus gate, Ellie turned to him. I don't have a suitcase, she said. Just a backpack. That's weird, right? He laughed. It's perfect. She reached into her pocket and handed him something. His old ID badge from Langston Innovations, scuffed and cracked, with his picture half faded. I found this in a drawer a while ago, she said. And you were someone before me. I think it's time you remembered that. He took it slowly, emotion tightening in his throat. You really are a genius. She hugged him, this time longer, tighter. Thank you, she whispered, for not walking past. He whispered back, thank you for giving me a second chance. As she walked toward the dorms, backpack slung over one shoulder, he watched her go. No paparazzi. No applause. Just a girl who changed the world and a man who let her. That night back in Brooklyn, Richard returned to Second Corps and turned on the lights. Dozens of kids waited in the classroom. Some looked scared. Some looked lost. He smiled and picked up a whiteboard marker. All right, he said, let's get started. Because this wasn't the end, it was just the beginning of Ellie's legacy, of Richard's redemption, of every forgotten kid who just needed someone to believe.